We've been reading in the Bible on several past Sundays in the class here in the book of Joshua. We are presently right now in Joshua chapter 7 and going into verse number 9. But before I start reading there, I'm going to back up just a little bit and say what leads up to this. Because right now in today's lesson, we're speaking about a curse that is on Israel for something that was done that God said not to do, and there was one individual that didn't take heed to it. You know, when God tells us to do something, we need to do it. God tells us to do something, He's going to make a way to do that very thing. And if God says don't do it, His Word gives us instructions on how to live our life, things to do and things not to do, how we're to conduct ourselves. You know, people needs to see Jesus in our lives. We don't have to go around and just saying who we are or what we are, but people need to just be able to see it in our everyday lives. And it is an everyday thing. It's not just a Sunday morning. It's not just a Sunday evening. It's not just a midweek service. It's not just when you have a special service, a revival or something. It is 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We are to be Christ-like. That's what Christian means. But I want to back up a little bit. A chapter or two prior to chapter 7, God gave instructions. The Lord spoke to Joshua. And He's telling Joshua and the people of Israel that He is wanting them to go to Jericho. Now Jericho, God was going to give Jericho into their hands. God gave instructions on what to do. But on the way to the journey, here's the thing about it first. They had to cross the Jordan River. Now the Jordan River at this particular time, that this was taking place, was in a major flood. The Jordan River was, I think, somewhere around about maybe 2 miles wide at this time. And it was extremely, at the very center, at the deepest part, extremely deep. So how, in the natural, getting to the banks of this, in the natural, how are they going to cross this river when it's in a flood like that? Well, people, in the natural, we can't do it. But what God says, if God tells you to go to the other side, you're going to get to the other side. Regardless of what it may look like in front of you, you're going to get there. If God says He's going to make that way, He's going to make that way. They get to the bank of the Jordan River. There it is, all that water. And I tell you, I think just whenever the very first step was taken, now the Lord gave instructions as to who was to go first. I'm not going to get in all of that right there. You can read it. It's very interesting. It's very good. You can read it, but I'm going to back up a little bit here. But when God gives the instructions, when that very first foot touched that edge of that water, when it made contact, God raised the water up. God split it. God made a way. The waves just went up. And they began crossing. Again, if God tells you to do something, He's going to provide a way. Now, before I get into verse number 7, where it's speaking about the accursed thing, I want to back up a little bit first. Okay, as I say, the Lord told Joshua how, when he got to the other side of Jordan, how to defeat Jericho. He gave him the instructions of how many times he wanted to do a certain thing, for how many days he wanted to do it, and then on the 7th day, how many times he wanted to do the same thing he'd been doing for 6 days, one time each day, but on the 7th day, he said, do it 7 times. He also instructed him, I want you then to blow on the trumpets at a certain time, and then I want the people to shout. Now, it wasn't that the trumpets, it wasn't that the shout is what defeated Jericho. It's that the obedience and carrying it out exactly the way Joshua was instructed by the Lord to do. And they did it. But now here, before we get into it, I want to back up here in verse number 26 of chapter 6. I want to read that. It says in verse number 26 of chapter 6, And Joshua adjured them at that time, saying, Cursed be the man before the Lord who rises up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof in his firstborn, and in his youngest son shall he set up the gates of it. Now the people had already done crossed Jordan now. And they marched around the city of Jericho 6 days. They did as they was instructed to do. On that 7th day, they did as God instructed them to do. And the walls fell flat. God did it. And the walls fell flat. They fell flat. Okay now. All right. So, through obedience. Through obedience. But notice what it says here. He shall lay the foundation thereof in his firstborn. I've said this for years. Nothing you do in life, whether it be something that brings joy or whether it is something that may bring sorrow, nothing you do in life as an individual will only have an effect on you alone. If it's joy, if there's laughter, if there's rejoicing to take place, there's going to be others to rejoice along with you. If it's something that sorrow is there, there's going to be others that feels the pain. It's going to affect them. We'll get into that a little bit further as we get along in the lesson here. Okay, so then, all right, so that was verse number 26 of chapter 6. There's a curse placed on Jericho. In verse 19 of chapter 6, it was told what to do with the silver and the gold. In verse 19, after the walls came down flat, and after the people were destroyed, and the animals destroyed, God had instructed them on what to do with the silver and gold. And here in verse number 19 he says, But all the silver and gold and vessels of brass and iron are consecrated unto the Lord. They shall come into the treasury of the Lord. I looked up the word consecrated to get a little better understanding. Let me read it this way. But all the silver and gold and vessels of the brass and iron are sacred. Consecrated is sacred. It's sacred to the Lord. The house of the Lord that we gather is sacred to the Lord. It's sacred to the Lord. Okay, it was told what to do with the silver and gold. And then in verse number 21, let me go right there. We're leading up to chapter 7, verse number 9, with this right here, verse number 21. What to do with the people and the animals. Verse number 21 says this, And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and ass, with the edge of the sword. Destroyed them according to the way they were commanded to do. Commanded to do. Now, let's go to the verse 26 here and see what it has to say. As I read it a little while ago. And Joshua adjured them at that time, saying, Now God told them what to do. Destroy people and animals. God told them what to do with the silver, the gold. It was not to be no one was to keep any of this. God told them what to do with it. And Joshua adjured them at that time, saying, Cursed be the man before the Lord, who rises up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof in his firstborn, and in his youngest son shall he set up the gates. Now, what I want to do now, let's get into chapter number 7. I want to read the first verses 1 through 9. I'll just make a few little comments about this right here as we go along, leading in to verse number 9. It says, verse number 1, But the children of Israel, they did something that they were told not to do. An individual did something that he heard not to do. But the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah took of the accursed thing. He kept some stuff. He went against God's will.